join. Uh, Hopefully, they will not miss much. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Sarah Duffy. I'm Director of External Affairs at the Illinois Power Agency. Um, this is the second webinar that we're hosting on a new mechanism called elective pay. And we're really excited to provide this resource to approved vendors today. Next slide. So to go over what we'll talk about, I'll provide some introductions and a few housekeeping items. And then I'll pass it over to my colleague Cassie Rowlands, who is serving as a consultant to the Illinois Power Agency to support approved vendors, to support project owners in learning about and complying with the requirements for elective pay. She's going to give an overview of elective pay as a mechanism, which tax credits it can be used for, how it's changed after the legislation this summer, specifically some key points to keep in mind as approved vendors. And then we'll also be joined by Claire Brinley from the Illinois Finance Authority to give an overview of some resources that IFA offers to kind of support projects seeking these tax credits as well. And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. So please do remain muted until we get to the Q&A portion. It helps everyone clearly hear the presentation. We're recording this webinar and that will be available on the IPA elective pay website. I'm sure Tori can put that link in the comments at some point during the presentation, but it is available on our general IPA website as well. We'll also post the slides so that any links that are in the slides can be accessed through the posted slides. We do not permit AI note takers during our virtual presentations, and so if we notice any, they will be removed from the meeting. Um, this is the second event, as I mentioned. The first was held on December 3rd. The slides and recording are already up on the website. A lot of it will be similar to what we covered today. It's a little bit of a simpler presentation since it was for potential project owners or existing project owners, whereas this is more designed to support approved vendors. Next slide. So I'm sure you all are familiar with most of this, given that you're registered with the IPA, but we are an independent state agency created in 2007. We're responsible for creating an annual energy procurement plan for the retail customers for electric utilities. We also implement the state's renewable portfolio standard through programs like Illinois Shines and Illinois Solar for All, as well as incentives for utility scale projects. Our interest in elective pay is really based in our interest in making sure that Illinois customers, Illinois energy users, and developers are maximizing the federal incentives as long as they are available. And so we really wanted to make sure that as many people as are eligible can leverage those to reduce the cost of their projects. So I think at this point I'm going to pass it to Cassie, who's going to get into the substance of our presentation today, and is much more knowledgeable about elective pay than I am. So just gonna, looks like maybe we're having trouble getting to the next slide. There we go. All right, great. Take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Cassie Rollins. I am a consultant for the IPA, like Sarah said. This slide just explains that I am not a accountant or a lawyer, and you do not want me doing your taxes. So I'm here to explain elective pay as a mechanism, uh, how it works with the latest policies that Congress enacted, and answer some questions. but certainly you'll want to connect with a professional tax advisor if you're working with any entities that may be ready to file for these tax incentives. So, starting very high level here, elective pay, also called direct pay, is a mechanism for tax-exempt entities that are investing in clean energy. So many of you, as private companies, may have made use of federal tax incentives if you own and operate the solar project, for example. Those same incentives were not available to tax exempt entities like local governments, public school districts, nonprofits prior to the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. With that bill becoming law, these tax incentives were newly available to these tax exempt entities for the first time. So these entities can file a federal tax return, claim the credits, and get a check back from the IRS for the amount of the tax credit. These tax incentives claimed by using elective pay can be combined with grants, loans, and other types of funding, but there are some specific rules around that, and we covered that in the previous webinar that's listed on the IPA website. Um, we'll talk about how much these tax credits can be worth in a little bit. And it's important to know they're also uncapped and not competitive. So your customers can claim the tax credits for one solar project, for 10 solar projects. It really depends on how many projects they place in service. I'll also say that we really are focusing this webinar towards installers. I know AVs can also be entities that own the projects themselves. So the tax exempt entities I'm talking about here are the ones who will have to do the paperwork if they're going to claim the credit. We covered a lot of the kind of process and other types of information for entities that are going to be claiming the credit for themselves in the last webinar. We're going to talk today more about how solar companies can help entities understand elective pay and prepare to use elective pay. It's important to note that the tax exempt entity has to own the energy properties, for example, the solar panels, in order to claim the credit. So if your customers are using a lease or PPA model and they don't own the energy property, then they cannot claim the credit. Um, if your company owns the panels, you could claim the credit, but you won't use elective pay. You'll just claim the credit on your company's tax return like normal. Elective pay is only for the tax exempt entities that are going to own the properties um, and claim the credit on their tax return. If the project costs are entirely covered by restricted grant dollars, then they cannot claim the credits. So I've seen a number of eligible entities who have had large grants. Those cover the entirety of their project costs. That's one of the limitations I mentioned earlier of combining grants and tax credits. You cannot claim the tax credit if the whole project is paid for with grant money. And finally, it's important to note that there is a time limitation on claiming these credits. You have to look back to your most recent tax year, and you're able to claim the credits for projects placed in service in that last tax year when you're submitting the return for that tax year. This means that projects placed in service in 2023 and most of 2024 are unable to be claimed now. So we're really looking at projects placed in service in 2025 and going forward. One thing we've learned just since the last webinar is that in a lot of cases, some tax exempt entities are working with CPAs who may not be familiar with elective pay. Um, They may be used to filing the Form 990 for a nonprofit annually, or just not used to working with tax exempt entities like local governments who don't ever file a tax return otherwise. So, a lot of times, AVs might be the only ones who know about elective pay in this entity's kind of network. So, we wanted to make sure that you all have clear information on how to use elective pay and who can use it. So I've mentioned a couple of the eligible entities here, but this is a more comprehensive list. So we're talking about local and regional governments and their divisions, whether it be um, transportation authorities, water authorities, public school districts, all of those that kind of fall under the public sector realm. Community colleges, public universities fall under that as well. Rural electric cooperatives, nonprofits, houses of worship, and other faith-based organizations. And if there are any organizations who are not sure where they fit in this, the IRS FAQ on eligibility is very helpful in kind of sorting through exactly where some organizations fit. In terms of eligible projects, solar, of course, is an eligible project that can claim federal tax credits. There are other types of projects, geothermal energy storage, that also can qualify. EV charger installations and EV purchases are eligible, but there are time limitations on those given the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed over the summer. EV purchases have to have been made before September 30th of this year. And for EV charger installations, those have to be installed by June 30th of 2026 in order to claim those credits. I'm going to focus primarily on solar projects today, but I'm happy to answer questions about other types of projects. One of the most common questions we get is whether the use of elective pay and the tax credits still exist. The answer here is yes, they definitely do, and that's why we really want to make sure everyone has the latest information and is making use of them. Elective pay payments are still being processed by the IRS on a normal time frame, seeing the payments being turned around in about 60 days if everything was filled out correctly. Project ID numbers are still being issued by the IRS. There's a step before you get to the filing process where the IRS has to issue you identification numbers for your project. Those are still being processed pretty swiftly, actually, in just a couple of weeks. The IRS telephone number and helpline is working. There are long wait times, but folks are getting through that way. Same thing with email. There's a elective pay specific email inbox. I have gotten same day turnaround responses from that inbox. And the IRS hosts monthly office hours. So if your clients are having any issues with elective pay and having submitted any kind of filings already, there's some resources here that can help. We also can help as well. But just wanted to share this information so that you're aware that this is all moving ahead, which is a little bit different than the kind of grant world that some folks may have experience with. So I'm going to focus on the investment tax credit, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, but I'll just start again high level here. So almost all entities installing solar are going to claim the investment tax credit. It is a one-time payment based on a percentage of the project costs. This is an alternative to the production tax credit, which pays a certain amount of money over time based on how much energy the project produces. Having worked with elective pay entities across a number of states, I have only seen them claiming the investment tax credit, not the production tax credit. So that's why I'm going to focus on that one today. The ITC can also be claimed for other types of zero emission energy property, like energy storage and others, geothermal, for example. Um, It really is focused on any kind of energy property that doesn't have any emissions. Projects that started construction prior to 2025 will claim Section 48, which is actually based on renewable energy technologies specifically. Projects that started construction this year or later will claim 48E, which is focused on the zero emission technology. So, when thinking about how much money you'll get back through claiming these tax credits via elective pay, you have to start thinking about calculating the base credit first. So, this is the minimum tax amount that you'll get, and it's based on a few different factors. If your project is under 1 megawatt, then it will always be a 30% tax credit. If it is larger than one or equal to 1 megawatt, it'll be a 6% tax credit as the base, unless you comply with certain labor rules. If you can prove you've complied with those, then you'll get a 30% credit. The labor rules are called the prevailing wage and apprenticeship rules. And like I said, those kick in for projects that are claiming the investment tax credit and that are 1 megawatt or larger. As an aside, any electric vehicle installations also must comply with these prevailing wage and apprenticeship rules in order to get the 30% credit for electric vehicle chargers. So, what are these rules? There are four components to them. The installer has to pay prevailing wage that is specific to the geographic area of the project. A minimum number of labor hours must be worked by apprentices from certified apprenticeship programs. There are minimum ratios of apprentices to journey workers that need to participate on the project. And there's a rule about participation where any taxpayer, contractor, or subcontractor with more than 4 employees must hire at least one apprentice for the project. Um, I know a lot of folks hear prevailing wage and they think Davis-Bacon and that, they've complied with that before, so they're good to go. That generally does not include the apprenticeship requirements, which might be new to some folks. So that is really something that you should dig into. I've got a link here in the slide and that you'll be able to see once we post them. That leads to the Department of Labor website and provides more information on exactly what all of these rules entail, because this is just a high level overview. If you are working on larger projects or any EV chargers, I would really encourage you to look into this and see if it is something that you're able to comply with in order to get that 30% credit in those cases. I will note that the documentation is very important on the projects I've worked on where they're complying with this. We're looking at weekly payroll statements and making sure that very specific information about each employee, each apprentice on the project is being reported on a weekly basis. And so there's a lot there that you'll need to substantiate. And it's important because if the IRS is to audit the customer who's claiming these credits, they're going to want to see all of this documentation to back up what the claim says, which is that you complied with these rules. In the case of an audit where they're not able to substantiate compliance here, then the customer will have to pay back amounts to the IRS, and that will be with interest. So it could be a very costly mistake. So once you have your base credit of 6 or 30% for the investment tax credit, you can also add bonus credits on top of that to increase the value of the tax credit. The first one is the Energy Communities Bonus Credit, and this is purely location based. So it's really focused on incentivizing more projects in areas where there are former fossil fuel infrastructure and high unemployment rates. It also, well, first I'll say anything on this map in the pink or green does qualify. And so when you go back to the link here, you can see that You can put in your specific address and you can see if that census tract qualifies. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. One other point here is that brownfield locations also qualify for this bonus credit. They're just not located on the map because you'll need to be able to substantiate that it actually does qualify as a brownfield. So it's very case specific. But this bonus credit is the easiest one to comply with. And it's an easy way to get an extra 10% for these various locations. The second bonus credit is the domestic content bonus credit. So this is incentivizing projects that use a certain portion of made in the USA products. It's important to note again that 1 megawatt threshold is a really key number. So if you've got any projects right at 1 megawatt or larger, it's important to know that if those don't use domestic content, if they don't meet these minimum made in the US requirements, they actually receive a penalty. So it's no longer a bonus, it's really a requirement for those projects. Otherwise, the credit is reduced to 85% of the credit amount. Or for projects starting construction next year, it'll be reduced to 0% in 2026. This rule is specific to elective pay projects only. And again, it's just for projects 1 megawatt and over. So it's important if any of your tax exempt clients are looking at those large projects to be aware of this. Oops, I did this last time. I went too far down the line there. Sorry about that. Finally, the Low Income Communities Bonus Credit Program is another bonus credit that's available. This one is the exception to the rule that the tax credits aren't competitive. This one is competitive. Your client, the entity claiming the tax credit, would have to place the project in service after they've applied and received an allotment from the Department of Energy. So they have to apply as if it was a grant. It's competitive. The Department of Energy will only allocate a certain number of megawatts, this bonus credit. The entity has to wait to place in service until they hear back from the Department of Energy and receive the allocation. Then they can place in service. So it's got a number of complications, timing, competitive, and it's also often oversubscribed in most of the four categories. So this is not one that we really tell folks to count on, but it is a nice to have if all the stars kind of align with that one. So that brings me to a couple points we wanted to share with AVs on the bonus credits. If you're informing your customers about elective pay, about the investment tax credit and the bonus credits, just make sure you're sharing all of these facts with them. I've heard a lot of confusion before about the low income bonus credit specifically and certain folks thinking it's just geography based. You know, there's a map for this one too. If you're located on the map, that's kind of the first step. But of course, like I said, you've got to apply to the Department of Energy for this bonus credit. So it is not purely just based on location like the Energy Communities bonus credit is. Make sure to tell clients it's a competitive process. Just be aware that the application period actually doesn't open until February, so projects that are looking to place in service soon aren't going to be within that time frame to apply. Um, and there are, like I said, the time constraints about placing in service. Can't do that until you hear back from the Department of Energy. So projects need to be able to wait a little bit before actually placing in service if they want to claim this credit. The domestic content bonus credit is more complex than kind of these panels are made in the US. I have heard from folks varying degrees of familiarity with this bonus credit, but it is not the same as Build America, Buy America, or BABA rules. All of the tax credits have their own rules and regulations issued by the IRS. So if your project uses equipment that is BABA compliant, it does not necessarily mean that it will meet the domestic content bonus credit requirements. You'll have to take a look at those IRS regulations. And see if the equipment you are using actually complies with this specific rule. And one thing we just want to share in terms of consumer protection, please don't overpromise. If you tell customers about the bonus credits, please be ready to provide the necessary documentation and information they'll need to claim them. So, for the domestic content bonus credit, for example, you'll have to pull documentation from the manufacturer of the equipment and provide that to the tax exempt entity so that they're able to claim that bonus credit with confidence. So they will need to rely on you for some of those materials. So just make sure that if you're talking with them about those credits, you're able to provide them with the necessary information they'll need. So I'm sure you know the investment tax credit was affected by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, so I'm going to go over some of those changes here. The prohibited foreign entity rules, sometimes referred to as the foreign entity of concern rules, are the kind of biggest new regulation affecting the tax credits going forward. These rules set restrictions for projects involving entities and materials from China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. There are three different kind of types of regulations that are now in effect. Entities that are prohibited foreign entities from these countries cannot claim the tax credits themselves. Generally, with elective pay, we're not really going to see too much of an issue there in terms of the types of entities that we're dealing with. Again, we're talking about local governments, houses of worship, nonprofits, public school districts here in Illinois. Generally, those are not going to be prohibited foreign entities. The second rule is about payments. So these entities in Illinois can't be making payments to prohibited foreign entities from those countries. And the third regulation is around projects that involve materials and components from companies owned and operated in these uh, prohibited foreign entities. If projects don't comply with those three new types of regulations, they cannot claim the tax credit anymore. So these rules are very, very detailed. The regulations are not out yet from the IRS, unfortunately. So we're in a little bit of a gray area trying to make sense of regulations that are still to come. The third regulation at the top, projects involving materials and components from companies owned or operated by prohibited foreign entities, is one of the biggest concerns across the industry, and I'm sure some of you are already aware of it. This rule applies to projects beginning construction January 1st, so just a couple of weeks from now. You may be familiar with some of the rules around what starting construction means. We don't have regulations again about the prohibited foreign entity rules. However, the IRS did issue guidance about what start of construction means for solar and wind projects following One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That definition is being used by a lot in the industry to determine start of construction for the purposes of the prohibited foreign entity rules, just because it is the most conservative definition out there right now. That definition is broken into two kind of buckets. So projects smaller than or equal to 1.5 megawatts can start construction by simply paying or incurring 5% of the total final project costs. We're recommending folks try to pay or incur 10% or more because, again, this is final project costs. So if they entities are paying the 5% of kind of estimated cost up front, costs increase over the life of the project. or of the construction period. And then that 5% is no longer 5% of the total final project cost. So we're trying to encourage folks to pay a larger deposit up front in order to meet this start of construction definition for these smaller projects. Larger projects over 1.5 megawatt must begin physical work of a substantial nature at the project site. There's no set definition for this, but there are a number of indicators in this IRS guidance that is located on the IRS website. So again, just wanting to dive into these three types of regulations. I mentioned entities themselves cannot be a prohibited foreign entity. Payments cannot be made to prohibited foreign entities. Both of those would disqualify the entity from claiming the tax credit. On this material assistance rule, projects can't receive, quote, material assistance from a prohibited foreign entity. It can, this regulation can be looking at where the project's components are produced or manufactured, but that's not necessarily going to be the end all be all. It's really looking at the company that is producing the equipment and how they are owned and operated. So we're hearing a lot of companies saying our panels are made in the US, so they're PFE compliant. But it's really not totally about where the panels are made. It's about the company, where it's headquartered, where it's organized, and the ownership of the company. So there are cases where US made equipment can still run up against issues relating to this new regulation. And just wanting to emphasize again, the regulations for these new rules have not been issued yet. I think everyone is waiting with bated breath for the IRS to issue those regulations. But until then, we just kind of have the text of the law and a lot of uncertainty, unfortunately. So the IRS did, like I said, put out regulations about beginning of construction. Those are specifically to be used with for the purpose of determining um, uh, the expiration dates of the investment tax credit, which is another piece that was within the One Big Beautiful Bill Act over the summer. So you have to look at when a project started construction in order to determine the kind of expiration date of the tax credits. So for any projects that began construction or that begin construction after July 4th of next year, they have to place in service by the end of 2027. So they're on an expedited time frame if they start construction July 5th of 2026. If the projects begin construction before July 4th of 2026, they are not on an expedited time frame, but they just have to follow the continuous construction rule of the IRS, which means placing in service within 4 years. For other types of projects that are claiming the investment tax credit, geothermal, battery storage, for example, those are still good through 2025. They can claim the credit for at 100% of the credit through 2033, and then it kind of ramps down from there. So there's a much longer lead time for those types of credits. The expiration dates at the top of this slide are just for solar and wind projects. I'm going to now turn it over to Claire to talk about the loan programs they've got at IFA.
Thank you, Cassie. Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund program, since it pairs really well with these direct pay credits and tax credits that Cassie just explained. So this Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund, or EERLF, is an IFA program that provides low interest loans to folks that are installing solar or making energy efficiency upgrades to public and commercial buildings. So EERLF is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, and this award was actually made directly to the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, and they were awarded about $15.9 million, but then they then allocated about $14.3 million to the Illinois Finance Authority, also known as the Illinois Climate Bank, in order to establish and administer the fund. So these loans are specifically designed to, as I said, help finance building energy efficiency projects in Illinois. If we can go to the next slide. So the main loan product that we offer is a bridge loan, which is a short-term loan, and it's intended to bridge the financing gap for incentives that come in after project completion, such as the IRA tax credits or direct pay provisions. Um, we also will, however, bridge some other incentives too, such as the Illinois Solar for All incentives offered by the Illinois Power Agency, or some of the ComEd and Ameren energy efficiency rebates, or other state of Illinois or federal grants that you might be getting that come in after project completion and you need that upfront financing. We will continue to bridge the direct pay and tax credits for as long as they're around. We can go to the next slide. So what types of projects are eligible for this bridge loan? So first of all, there needs to be a building. This is an energy efficiency program for existing buildings, so we cannot do any new construction. And the types of buildings that are eligible are pretty much any building except for single-family residential projects. We will do public buildings or buildings owned by nonprofits. We will do commercial buildings that are privately owned, and we will do multifamily buildings that have 5 or more units. But again, no new construction or single-family residential projects. In particular, our target audience is local governments and nonprofits. And some of the buildings that you might think of are municipally owned buildings, public libraries, public school buildings, affordable housing, multifamily buildings. But again, just so long as it's not a single family residential or multifamily with fewer than 5 units, your project is eligible for this program. And we can go to the next slide. Oh, we went a little bit too far. So again, because this is an energy efficiency program, any project that we fund needs to have an aspect of energy efficiency in it in order to be eligible. And so it must address one of the 3 things you see on this screen, either the energy efficiency of the building or facility, the physical comfort of the building or facility occupants, or the quality of air in the building or facility. So notably, solar on its own does not address one of these 3 aspects. It's not considered an energy efficiency technology because it doesn't reduce the amount of energy that the building is using. But if you were doing solar with battery backup, solar with load management software, or you're installing solar at the same time that you're, adding HVAC improvements or installing energy efficient lighting, you're doing solar plus some other energy efficiency technology at the same time, then your project meets those requirements. Also, notably, any improvements that we finance have to be recommended in a qualified energy audit, and they have to be lifetime energy cost. They have to be life cycle cost effective. So getting an audit is also a part of this program. The state of Illinois has some grants for free energy assessments for public housing authorities or other like public housing buildings. And there are also free or reduced cost energy assessments available through some utilities such as ComEd and Ameren for commercial spaces as well. And we're happy to work with you on figuring out where to get an audit done and how to make sure that those audits meet our requirements. We have some guidance available on our website, some resources for your reduced cost audits on our website as well, and also some guidance if you want to reach out to me directly and discuss. One thing I want to note is that geothermal is an eligible energy efficiency technology, and as Cassie mentioned, the tax credits for geothermal projects are not phasing out until 2035. So I know a lot of this call is focused on solar projects, but geothermal is actually a really good fit for this program because it meets both the requirement of being energy efficient and you can get tax credits for it. So it's really easy for us to offer that bridge loan for a geothermal project. Um, Yes, thank you. You can find a more detailed information in the term sheet that we have posted on our website, and I will drop that link in the chat. But just to provide a brief snapshot, as I mentioned, our main loan product is bridge loans, but we will also do a longer term participation or co-lending loan if that's something that your project needs. We can discuss that. For the bridge loans, the maximum amount that we will bridge is the total amount of tax credits or other incentives that you're getting. So again, as I mentioned, we will bridge the tax credits plus Illinois Solar for All plus any other short-term grants that you're getting up to $1 million, the maximum per building. But if you have multiple projects, multiple different buildings, we can do $1 million on each of your buildings. Yes. And then again, as I mentioned, we will also do a co-lending loan, a longer term with another financial lending institution up to 7 years if needed. In general, our interest rates are going to be below market between 3 to 6% for both the bridge loans and the participation loans. Um, Again, all this information and more is available on our website if you want to look a little bit deeper into some of the loan terms. One other thing that I want to highlight is because this is a federal program, all of the projects must comply with labor, wage, and benefit requirements under the Davis-Bacon Act. And then, which sort of pairs nicely, if you are looking to get the prevailing wage prevailing wage and apprenticeship bonus that Cassie mentioned, you'll already be doing that through the EERLF program. And I think that's it.
I think I skipped this slide when I was skipping around a bit there. So, but thank you, Claire. I just wanted to mention that IPA will be continuing to conduct outreach and providing education and technical assistance on elective pay. So, if your company or any of the clients you're working with want to reach out to us for help, we can certainly do that. We also can connect folks with the Lawyers for Good Government elective pay sprint hub as well, and get some legal support for entities that way. Okay, now I think we can go to Q&A. So I think I'll hand it back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Cassie. So we have a few questions already in the chat. I guess I'll start with those. A couple people are seeking clarification on the 5% safe harbor. Tony asked whether a customer just needs to provide a 5% deposit to the installer, or does the installer or someone else need to kind of have documentation of a material procurement, of professional services, design and engineering, or anything like that.
So if this is asking, if a client can just pay you 5% generally, without kind of more detail, I think that probably wouldn't work. They'll need to, I mean, the IRS rules don't outline the specifics, I should say, first of all. But generally, we're looking at someone signing a contract with the solar company, providing a 5% payment, ideally, again, 10%. And certainly the entity will need to be able to show that payment was made. Documentation is important. I am not sure that there needs to be specific documentation of the types of services that have been rendered or that are paid for with that deposit, if that's what was meant in that comment there.
Tony, you're welcome to come off mute if you would like to
Thank you.
have any follow-ups to that.
Yeah, thank you. I think Uh, Cassie did a good job. I mean, yeah, we're just curious to make sure that the documentation that we have in place is satisfactory to the IRS for any audit purposes. I mean, the intention is that we would begin procurement of some, substantial materials. Um, Obviously the progression of a project is, there's surveys done, there's due diligence done before engineering can start. So we won't necessarily have an official bill of materials, but we know we're going to need certain materials, and we could procure those with that deposit. So I think we'll err on the conservative side and probably use that deposit to secure something physical as opposed to uh, just professional services. So thank you, Cassie, for the clarification there.
Sure.
We have another question on the 5% safe harboring ahead of to prove start of construction before the new prohibited foreign entity rules kick in. Um, it looks like the Mr. Callahan, I'm not sure how to pronounce your first name, is wondering, about the risk associated since the IRS rules aren't out, whether there's a risk that that 5% safe harboring could kind of the definition of what counts as that could change with the
Yeah.
prohibited foreign entity regulations such that you think you're in compliance now and then something comes out in January saying, for example, you know, that only 5% spent on XYZ type of expenditure counts.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and this is kind of speaking to that gray area I mentioned that we're in and the level of uncertainty. Unfortunately, because the IRS has not issued the regulations on the prohibited foreign entity rules, and in fact, the regulations that they did issue redefining start of construction specifically have a footnote saying these regulations are not intended to be relied on for compliance with the prohibited foreign entity rules. There is that risk. I think we got this question before about which start of construction rules apply. Is it the longstanding ones from 2013 and 2018, or is it these new narrower ones that were issued in August of this year, which clearly state they're only for the purpose of determining whether solar and wind projects have started construction for the purpose of determining kind of the expiration date of those credits, like I mentioned earlier. Um, I think the answer is that the newer restrictive regulations clearly apply in the cases they're outlined to apply to. And some would say that the broader regulations on start of construction apply for everything else. However, I think it's prudent. What I'm seeing is CPAs advising entities to use the more restrictive definition, the more recent definition that came out in August, with this 5% safe harboring for the small projects and the physical construction test for the larger projects, because that's the most stringent definition out there. But the risk still remains that the IRS could put out guidance for the prohibited foreign entity rules, and they could redefine start of construction. We just can't anticipate that. We don't know when they will issue regulations, and we don't know what they would look like. Hopefully, I didn't
Um,
just muddy the waters a bunch.
yeah, unfortunately, uh, that's the state of things right now. Kai has a question for projects that aren't seeking safe harbor that need to meet the physical work of a substantial nature. Um, or I'm sorry, for projects wanting to safe harbor that don't are not able to use the 5% because they're over 1.5 megawatts and need to rely on a physical work of a substantial nature. He's wondering if there is a lower limit on the value. I would assume the word substantial nature is doing some work there, but maybe Cassie, you can explain if there is any more clarity on that.
Yeah, there's no kind of numeric definition in that test, in that physical work test. The IRS regulations that came out in August outline a number of things that do not count as physical work of a substantial nature, and that is a lot of site prep work, studies, that kind of thing. They're very clear that those would not meet the bar for physical work of a substantial nature. In terms of solar projects, I think they only provide one example about something along the lines of getting steel or iron in the ground for the racking. Don't quote me on that, but that's kind of the one example they've given relating to solar projects meeting that physical work test. But no, there's not a whole lot of detail on kind of the minimum value of what constitutes physical work of a substantial nature.
Thanks, Cassie. Um, and then we have a specific question from Carrie McPherson about a project that finished installation at the end of 2024, but didn't make their last payment for the system until March of 2025. Um, they had been hoping to get direct pay, but didn't realize that they needed to go ahead and apply. And since it was technically turned on at the very end of 2024, are they no longer eligible?
Okay, so a couple things at play here. The rules around elective pay are based on placed in service date. So when you say it's technically turned on December 30th of 2024, I'd also wonder what the date of the interconnection was. When was it really fully functional, generating energy that the entity, the nonprofit, was able to use? So really understanding that that could span both of those calendar years, you'd have to really take a look at exactly what is listed for a date on the final permit, on the interconnection agreement, that kind of thing. Um, Also, I would say as a nonprofit, they might have a fiscal year that is different from calendar year. I would, next question I would ask would be, what is the tax year that they align with when they submit a Form 990 to the IRS each year? If that was on, say, I don't know, September to October fiscal year, then the December 30th date would be within their, September 24 to October of 2025 fiscal year that they've established with the IRS. So they would not, be too late. They could still file because the deadline is 4.5 months after the end of their fiscal year. So they would still have time. So I would say send us an email or contact us through the website with more details, and we are happy to go through all of that with them and get some answers.
And that might be a scenario where we pull in another partner, such as Lawyers for Good Government, if there are, really specific legal questions. Um, Mark is asking if you are not worried about the safe harbor compliance, what are the deadlines for a project to qualify? I'm assuming you mean if you're not worried about the foreign entity of concern or the other requirements um, and needing to safe harbor, what are the deadlines to projects to qualify for the tax credits generally? Is that what you're asking? Okay, great. Um, so
And
I
I would
believe,
assume for a solar project.
yeah, if it's for a solar or honestly even a wind project, I think,
Okay.
um, If the project starts construction before July 4th, 2026, then your only other requirement, other than the kind of qualitative things that Cassie ran through about prevailing wage and domestic content and things, would be being placed in service within 4 years if you are able to start construction before July 4th of next year. If you start construction after that, you have to be online and placed in service by December 31st, 2027. But then you will need to meet all of the um, prohibited foreign entity requirements that Cassie laid out. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And then Anthony is asking about safe harboring, or I think just like laying out their plans for how they plan to approach and using using um, expenditures on project materials as the expenditures to meet the minimum percentage for safe harbor.
Yeah, I would just caution on that one. Just because you're purchasing a bunch of panels does not mean that the projects are safe harbored. It, certainly for projects where you're looking at incurring the costs in order to kind of factor that into your safe harboring, they need to have specific locations that they're allocated to, and there are specific rules around that in the IRS guidance. So I would just say take a look at those.
And feel free to follow up with us for additional questions if you still have questions on that. And Anthony, I can answer your second question. Illinois Solar for All requires prevailing wage to be paid on all non-residential or non-houses of worship projects. So that would mainly be community solar or in the nonprofits and public facilities category. So any project that is seeking elective pay would also have to meet prevailing wage requirements in Illinois Solar for All, since those would be non-residential. And then Illinois Solar for All also has separate job trainee requirements that I believe overlap with apprenticeship requirements, so probably can be met by both. But you might want to ask the program administrator about that. I'm not an expert in our job trainee requirements. Um, and then Tony, my clarification on that was just that they still have to meet any placed in service dates if you're trying to avoid prohibited foreign entity requirements, and um, they just any of the other generally applicable requirements for the tax credits. Right. I'm just saying, I just wanted to clarify that it's not an automatic, um, like you still have to apply for and be eligible for the tax credits. Maybe I'm not explaining myself right,
No,
Cassie.
I get what you're saying. Yeah, Tony, when you said a project less than 1 megawatt will automatically get 30% regardless of prevailing wage, I think the point is just the prevailing wage and apprenticeship rules do not apply to projects claiming the investment tax credit that are less than 1 megawatt. But none of these projects automatically get a 30% credit. You know, they have to comply with all of the rules we've talked about, file the tax return by the certain deadlines, make sure they don't miss the deadlines for the expiration of the tax credits, etc. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we are at 4 o'clock. Um, I don't think I see other questions in the chat that we have not yet addressed, but if any of our responses kind of still left questions in your mind, or if they prompted new questions, please do reach out to us. I think it's just, is it IPA.contact us or contact us.ipa? I'm not sure. Tori, can you put the email address in the chat? We are screening for questions related to elective pay and making sure that all of those get directed to me and Cassie directly. So we will personally read any of the questions that come in on this topic. We also have posted some of the FAQs from our last webinar on the elective pay webpage. And we might, based on this conversation, add to those. But thank you so much for joining us. We are really looking forward to providing support for you all as you navigate this. It's not easy. And we're really trying to be um, uh, as helpful as possible. So thank you all and have a good evening.
Thank you.